Chanel Contos is a young Sydney woman who 5 years ago made headlines after she collated and published the testimonies of thousands of women and girls about instances of sexual assault that they'd experienced. Many had made allegations they'd been assaulted by teenage boys who went to some of Sydney's most elite private schools. So have things changed since then? Judging by the last week or so, perhaps not. Last week, one private school confirmed 2 of its students face abhorrent allegations that they and a third boy raped a girl at a home in Sydney southwest. The week before that, 3 students from Scots College, 2 aged only 14 and 1 just 13, were arrested and charged with the aggravated sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl. And then, of course, there's the Sydney Swans sexual assault allegation. I'm Samantha Salinger-Morris, and you're listening to the Morning Edition from The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Today, sexual consent activist and author Chanel Contos on elite schools, sports, and boys. It's Monday, August 24th. Welcome, Chanel, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, well, can you first off just remind our listeners about your campaign in 2021, what it was all about, and then what you discovered?
So in 2021, I posted an Instagram story saying, have you or has anyone close to you ever been sexually assaulted by someone who went to an all-boys school in Sydney? Which is very specific, but the campaign ended up getting over 7,000 testimonies from schools all across the country and all different types of schools, private, Catholic, public, and over 50,000 people signed a petition to mandate consent education in the Australian national curriculum. And we were actually successful in mandating that, which is incredible, but I think a different story for today.
And so then, of course, we fast forward to the present, and we've got a police investigation into a sexual assault allegation involving the Sydney Swans football club. Last week, St. Gregory's College confirmed that 2 of its students had been arrested after police alleged that they and a third boy raped a girl at a home in Sydney southwest. And the week before that, there was also the case of 3 boys, aged just 13 and 14, from Scots College. That was the same school that you uncovered had some of these issues in those testimonies you received. They were charged with the aggravated sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl. So is the problem just getting worse rather than better?
Unfortunately, in Australia, we are facing a worsening crisis of this specific type of teen-on-teen perpetrated sexual violence. What we know now is that teenage boys have actually overtaken adult men as the most likely perpetrator of sexual violence against an under 18-year-old. And mostly that is teenage boys perpetrating against teenage girls that are their current or former partners or that are known to them. So we are definitely up against some challenges. I think there have been some structural differences in the way that youth are experiencing life these days that may have been different 5-10 years ago. There are factors such as predatory algorithms and also very widely accessible and explicit pornographic content that is acting as the main form of sex education for young people that I think means it's a kind of different beast that we're up against now. And it's obviously amazing and great that we have consent education in schools, but 1 hour of consent once a year versus multiple hours a day of propagated misogynistic content onto young boys and men's screens online that again dehumanizes women and increases that entitlement piece, which are key drivers of sexual violence, I think need to be looked at and addressed. So yeah, I'm really sorry to say, but I think it is getting worse and we are seeing rising numbers of violence, but actually at the same time, lower likelihood to report. So we're also having more cases go unreported. It's not as if people feel more confident to speak up now, and that's why we have, more of a correction in the official numbers.
And I wanted to ask you a question about how, people are speaking about this sort of issue now, because there's been a lot of commentary about the way that the Sydney Swans sexual assault allegation has been reported in the media and also how the club has spoken about it. Because we've seen that Swans CEO, Matthew Pavlich, he was criticized early on for saying that the players, quote, found themselves, unquote, in this situation. So what's been your reaction to the way that's been spoken about?
Language does matter, and I have seen that criticism and I appreciate it because if this alleged event occurred, it was a series of intentions that led to it happening. It didn't happen accidentally. However, I think that we've seen the club react stronger than we've seen other clubs react previously by suspending all five players for the allegation until the end of the season. And, that's an ongoing case, and I'm not going to comment explicitly on it, but I do think it shows how much the response of these clubs that are really significant cultural setters in Australia matter to the public and how much sway and change they can have by how seriously they take allegations and how they approach them from the very first instance.
Well, let's get into this issue of a particular culture and whether it may or may not, I guess, foster certain attitudes against women. And I wanted to ask you generally, I guess, about elite all male environments in particular, whether they be at school or in sport, because there have been a couple of studies overseas of college campuses that have found that male athletes or men who sort of exist in all male environments, such as fraternities or team sports like basketball, that they are overrepresented in reported acts of sexual assault and domestic violence compared to the general student body. So can you walk us through, if you can, what is it about these environments that perhaps leads to that?
I think these institutions matter to everyone because boys and men who are socialized in them disproportionately go on to hold positions of power in our country and in our economy. And that means the way that they're socialized, whether that's with apathy or empathy towards certain groups, will dictate how our country runs, how our businesses run, what our parental leave policies are, the culture of institutions, our politicians, like all of these things. We've had 3 prime ministers attend Sydney Grammar and only 1 female prime minister. So just to kind of show again the concentration of power in like a select few schools in our country. But I think what happens in all male environments is that boys and men can often be socially rewarded from their peers by 3 key things. The first being physical ability, which is a spectrum all the way up until, boys getting in fights on the weekend is the extreme. And then the non-extreme and the most celebrated by our society is their physical sporting ability. But the other 2 things are wealth and sexual conquest. So you can understand how those would interact in these environments when you kind of get social status from being wealthy or from sexual activity with other girls or women. And on the elite athlete thing, again, remembering that like physical activity and that kind of like, you know, we all know the movie that shows the cool guy being the sporty guy, but there is also emerging research that shows that elite athletes tend to engage in sexual violence at disproportionately higher rates than the general population. So all of these studies are out of America, not Australia, I will say. There's one American study that's found that on college campuses, male athletes were overrepresented by a factor of 10 among the men who committed sexual acts of sexual assault and domestic violence. There's another US study that found that gang rapes that have been documented over a 10-year period on college campuses mostly involved men who existed in all-male environments such as fraternities or were part of a sports team, very specifically basketball or football in the US. And there is it's really crazy if you look at the mapping of where sexual violence occurs in the US, it's so highly concentrated in fraternities, in those all-male environments at college. And these kind of behavior patterns are usually attributed to the idea of group loyalty that you find and foster in these small male groups, like a living condition, a school, a sporting club. And in these places, basically, group mentality is at risk of overriding personal integrity, and kind of everyone falls victim of it, and everyone can lose out to the culture.
After the break.
How many more times do we have to have this conversation for everyone to snap into, an alleged gear for a period of time to say they're going to address the culture and the foundational aspects that allow this to happen, and then we're back at it again?
And I'm just wondering, have you ever witnessed anything like that? Because you went to an all-girls school in Sydney. So did you have any interactions with the boys' school that was related to the school that you went to that gave you an insight into any of this? Or is this something you've never actually seen personally?
We socialized with many different boys' schools when we were younger, but I've seen more sexual assaults than I could count and not understood what those were.
And what sort of age are you talking that you would have witnessed these sorts of things?
To be honest, I feel like it happened more when we were younger because we received consent education when we were in year 10. And I feel like that really changed a lot for our grade and the way that we understood things. I know it's obviously more important to give men this sort of education, but I think that it was really empowering for us as girls to have it and to understand and to be better friends and to have language and identify things as wrong. But if I had to think about it, I would say the worst years were kind of end of year 8 to kind of beginning of year 10 was when I feel like the most persistent stuff was happening. But all through high school, there was definitely never a time where it wasn't in a periphery in some way.
Wow. And you wrote a piece for our mastheads recently, and you said, when you would walk by a school, there'd be a chorus of schoolboys who would scream out and call you names. So, what sort of things were they calling you? And I guess, how did it make you feel at the time?
Oh, yeah. Mole, footy mole. Yeah, me and my friends were laughing, but not laughing about that when I was writing that, talking about the kind of final touches to that op-ed because we all had the same experience. I mean, sexism and misogyny definitely happen on school grounds. However, I guess aggravated sexual assault was much less likely to occur on school grounds, but it would be very common on weekends at football matches for the girls to kind of be yelled at, degrading comments, kind of the idea that, I don't know, you were there for an agenda or a reason. And that would happen. And I guess the teachers would see it, and probably the parents must have seen it too sometimes. I don't know, but it would happen a lot. It was a very universal experience. I'm unsure if it's still the case, but I did ask someone who was about 3 years younger than me, and she had the exact same experience.
And in the piece that you wrote for us, you also talked about sexual conquests, that boys and men who have frequently have sex with different women, they were seen as cool, especially when they were teenagers. So do you think this is then equating as they've gotten older to pressure that they're placing on women? Or what sort of connection, I guess, do you think there might be?
100%. I think the social expectations for boys and men to be sexually active young and frequently and with multiple girls is something that's really difficult for them as well if they don't feel ready. And something I noticed in teen years a lot, it would be very common for someone to, quote unquote, lose their virginity, have sex the first time, whatever, and then not engage in sexual acts for quite a long time afterwards because it was kind of like everyone left them alone and they had ticked that box. And I've just kind of noticed that in hindsight, like reflecting on the way that these behaviors used to go, because I think that the young boys weren't particularly ready either. But I do think that this is a key way that young boys and men can kind of transfer the pressure that they're feeling to be sexually active. And then, yeah, you combine that with widespread access to free mainstream pornography, which commonly depicts violence against women and currently acts as most young people's form of sex education. And it's very clear how that sexual entitlement is kind of amplified and emerging.
And Chanel, I just wanted to wrap up by asking you, I guess, about how the Sydney Swans allegations, how they're impacting a lot of women, I guess, because there's been numerous female fans who've expressed sort of shock and sadness. We've seen the former TV presenter Brooke Boney. She said that, these allegations are especially painful because so many women have either experienced sexual violence or they've watched those they love experience it. And the statistics, of course, here, they're horrible. 1 in 5 women has experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. So do you think this discussion, this horror that people are feeling now, do you think, is it something that could make a dent, I guess, in helping to overhaul the troubling cultures that we've got here?
Like, I'd love to say yes, but how many times have we been in this position? Like, Samantha, when you called me the other day to chat through coming on this podcast, and you were like, Chanel, you sound really tired. Actually, I can't remember what it was, but it was more than tired. And I was like, yeah, like, how many more times do we have to have this conversation for everyone to snap into, an alleged gear for a period of time to say they're going to address the culture and the foundational aspects that allow this to happen? And then we're back at it again. This This
Yeah.
obviously happens every single day, every single postcode in Australia, sexual, family, and domestic violence. But, there's always every 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, there's a series of high profile events that cause a lot of headlines. And then we're talking about it again. So I don't know what we need to do. Like, it's frustrating at this point because it's not as simple as one solution. There are so many things that need to be done from the government, from parents, from teachers, from individuals, from sporting clubs. It is everyone's responsibility to be part of combating this culture, because if you're being complacent in it, it kind of makes you complicit in it. However, there are hotspots, and that is schools, that is sporting clubs, that is institutions that serve alcohol, places where gambling occurs, or sporting events where gambling occurs. And we really just need to intervene on a structural level on these things. And again, there's always been these issues facing society and young people, but now we also have that intersection of explicit and constant access to pornography, plus algorithms that radicalize young boys into misogyny and ideals that dehumanize the girls and women around them. And it's going to kind of take everyone, but it can't just be another media cycle.
And Chanel, can you just tell us about the campaign that you're currently focusing on that you hope will help in this space?
So Teachers Consent has been running a campaign called Fix Our Feeds. This has gotten wide support from across the political spectrum, including from two former prime ministers, Julia Gillard and Malcolm Turnbull, and over 10,000 Australians and lots of high-profile people. And we're basically asking to make it so that as individuals, we get the choice to turn our algorithms on or off, and that we actually agree to enter the algorithm and bring that kind of informed consent to it. And the reason we've done this as a violence prevention organisation is because we've seen a sudden resurgence in misogynistic attitudes in young boys and men that we're highly concerned with, and we're seeing these attitudes play out in real-world behaviours that are harmful, unfortunately. But since launching this campaign, we've had support from people who are concerned with disordered eating content or democracy or men's mental health. Like, so many different cross-sections of society see this as something that is relevant to them. And we actually conducted polling that found that 71% of Australians agree with this policy change, which is really exciting. And the best thing about it is that it's content neutral. So it's not saying like this content isn't okay and this is. It's all about individual choice to say, do I want to be involved in an algorithm that's sending me content for the purpose of keeping me online for longer and to, play on my dopamine receptors to get me addicted and stay online? Or do I want to have a follower-only chronological feed, just like social media was back in the good old days, the 2010 to 2015 era? And we do think that this could help because we know that young boys and men are not seeking misogynistic content. It is being sent to them, and they're being used to fill the pockets of big tech by sending them content that makes them curious or makes them outraged or makes them scared or makes them insecure or desire things. And this is, of course, the algorithm is gendered, but everyone feels these sorts of things in different ways.
Well, thank you so much, Chanel, for your time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Today's episode was produced by Josh Towers. Our executive producer is Tammy Mills, and our podcasts are overseen by Lisa Muxworthy and Tom McKendrick. If you like our show, follow The Morning Edition and leave a review for us on Apple or Spotify. Thanks for listening.